Hi everyone, my name is Hugo and welcome to Hugo's Desk. Just a quick intro about this video. First of all, thank you so much for watching my live stream the other day. It was great. We had over 3,000 views during the stream and more than 160 of you watched the entire stream. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. As promised, here are the edited versions of the stream. This means only with the Nuke Compositing. There's no chat, no giveaways, no interruptions. Of course, if you want to watch the entire stream, you can still click on this link. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my sponsors, both BenQ and Foundry, for supporting and making these streams possible. BenQ has been supporting my channel for years now, and I can't thank them enough. Keep an eye on my videos since I am dropping very soon a review for the amazing ultra-wide BenQ PD3420Q, which I'm currently using as my main desktop monitor for both editing and visual effects. I'll also have a tour of my office very soon featuring all the BenQ monitors and also the rest of my equipment for grading and visual effects. Also, I would like to thank Foundry for all the support over the years. This channel would not be the same without Foundry. And as you know, I have a lot of Nuke-related content in both my main and also on my second channel. If you're interested, check out my previous streams where we do a short rundown of Nuke on my series called Nuke for Dummies. You can find that playlist here. If you're interested to learn even more about Nuke Compositing, I also have a complete Nuke course with 150 classes and over 50 hours fully endorsed by Foundry. You can check out all the details on this video. And that is it for me. Let's run the video. Here's another episode of Nuke for Dummies. This time we talk about the concept of filtering and scaling inside of Nuke. Enjoy. So now we've went through several examples of glow. Now I wanted to really talk about scaling, because scaling is a really important part and filtering is a really important part inside of Nuke. And I have a couple of examples here because it's very easy for you to break something when you scale something. So let me show you what I mean. Let's consider that we have this image here. And so this image here is an image that is in CG. And it's actually a full HD 1080, 1920 by 1080 render. Okay, so it has a specific resolution. Obviously, if I start reformatting, let's say that we put a reformat, which is a methodology inside of Nuke for you to scale things up. So remember, this is Nuke for Dummies, so obviously we're gonna go really low. So you need to understand that. That's why I'm explaining this so in detail. So, for example, imagine that you want to convert this image to 4K. If I do that, I can pick up the resolution from 4K here, and now this image is in 4K. So I've scaled it in 4K. Now, this image is in 4K, but if I zoom in, so for example, if I zoom into her nose, for example, in her line here, you can kind of see that we started with this kind of resolution, and now, sorry, I'm going to just do this. We started with this resolution. This is the full HD plate, and you can kind of see the type of pixelization that we have. And now when we scale to 4K, we get a blurrier image. And the reason why we're getting a blurrier image, of course, is because, you are scaling the image, and you are what we call filtering the image. And the type of filtering that we're doing into the image has to do with the cubical filtering, or any other filter. There's a lot of types of filters inside of Nuke. We'll go through this in a second. But if I zoom in, you can clearly see that where you had, notice how one pixel, so that let's consider this pixel here. So this pixel on the edge here. This is one pixel. Obviously, if I am on HD, I see one pixel. But if I'm going to be on 4K, which is 4 times the resolution, I then get 4 pixels, you see? So that's how you scale. Basically, you invent pixels where they don't exist. And so instead of having just 1, you get 4. Obviously, this blurs the image because you are basically splitting pixels where they don't exist. And the methodology of splitting these pixels has to do with the type of filtering that you use. So in this case, for example, if I use impulse, it doesn't filter anything. It's just straight scaling and really sharp. So if you look at the image here, It's scaling to 4K, but it's going to be anti-aliased. It's going to be like basically aliased. It's not going to be, the edge is not going to be blurred. If I use cubic, which is the default, it blurs and spreads the pixel. In fact, you can kind of see the spread goes all the way to the outside of the pixel. Notice how the pixel used to just be here, and now when I spread, it actually spreads and it almost like glows outside the borders. You can kind of see a pixel here, you see a pixel there, you see a pixel here, which are now outside the borders of that pixel because it's spreading. Of course, I then have keys, I have Simon, I have Riffman, I have Mitchell, I have Parson, I have Notch, I have Lenkus, I have Lenkus 6, and I have Zinc 4. Notice how all of them do very different things. If I go to cubic, I have a much blurry and much more softer link there. But if I, for example, go to, Riffman, I have a much sharper image. And if I go to Lenkus 4, I have kind of an in-between between them, and a 6 breaks up the pixels by you even seeing some edges that are now broken with some black edges. Notice how when I gamma up, notice how me basically like scaling this image from cubic, and if I use Simon, or if I use Riffman, or if I use Parson, or if I use Lenkus, notice how some of them create a black edge of distortion. So it's basically sharpening the image too much. So if I now go back to my gamma normal on my viewer, yes, the image is more scaled, it's in 4K, but notice how we have a very sharp edge. We have a very harsh scaling on the image. And that has to do with the, like all these types of filterings here have to do with the mathematical equation that is being calculated for how it scales and not scales. So this is basically how much it's upscaling and how much is downscaling the image. So obviously in Nuke 13, for example, now you have a machine learning type of scaling, which is really cool. You can kind of scale with machine learning. You also have Upscaler, which is a really nice plugin as well that allows you to upscale as well. It's really good results. A lot of people know a lot of plugins, but I'm not using plugins here. I'm just showing you like the raw thing, like inside of Nuke. Now, as always, Nuke's help file is incredibly helpful, and I'm sorry about the pun. Pardon my pun. So the cool thing about the help file inside of Nuke is that it actually controls, like if you press the little iteration bar there, it goes into the help file, and if you go all the way here, it actually explains you what each filter it is. You know, impulse remaps pixels carrying the original value, for example. You know, if I zoom in, cubic remaps the pixels receiving some smoothness. So this is cool, but there is actually a way for you to actually see the different transformations and filtering inside of Nuke. If you go to this page here, in the help file, I'm just going to make it a bit bigger for you to see it. Notice how the different values have to do with the type of algorithm that is being used for filtering. So for example, when we filter, we have, for example, impulse, which just like this graph, I'm going to zoom in even more so that you can see a bit better. Just like this graph says, it basically has 0 pixels and then 1 pixel and then 0 pixels again. So basically it's just like sharp. There's no feathering. There's no cubical feather. There's no antilization. It's like if you would have rendered something from 3D with no antilization settings whatsoever. That would be what would happen. But look at how cubic works. Cubic, basically the curve starts with a feather and it softens into the top, and then it starts to the feather and it softens to the bottom. That is why you have feathering when you do cubic filtering. Then if you can continue scrolling through this, I'm gonna just like zoom in even more. If you continue scrolling through this help file, you can kind of see that, for example, keys has a sharper negative curve that goes down and goes up. So that means it has like a bump that goes up and down when it's trying to sharpen the image. If you go to Simon, it's even more smooth, you know, plus a medium sharpen. So if you look at the way that it keys maps, as it sees there, remaps pixels receiving some smoothness plus minor sharpening. If you go to Simon, remaps pixels with some smoothing plus medium sharpening. And then if you go to Riffman remaps pixels, receiving some smoothing, plus a significant amount of sharpening. And sharpening kind of goes below the 0, and that's why you have negative values going into that sharpening. That's why it becomes so sharp. Then if you go to mutual, it is a lot of smoothing plus blurring. So it's like smooth and then blurring on top. If you go to Parson, it is the greatest smoothing of all the filters. So that's Parson is the one that is going to be the most blurred. So that means the result on Parson maybe sometimes is ideal, maybe not. Depends on what you're trying to do. Notch, for example, it's really good. It tends to be good to remove moe effect. You know, when you have the moe effect of screens and when you're like filming or photographing certain screens. And then, of course, Lankus 4 remaps receiving minor sharpening with negative portions of the curve. It's good for scaling down. So Lankus 4 is really good when you downscale. So, for example, if you're like making something from 4K to HD, for example, it's really good for that. And again, Lankus 6 is the same thing. It's really good for when you are trying to downscale as well. And then Sync 4, it's really good also for scaling down, but it receives a lot of sharpening. So all these things you have to consider. And I know this was already kind of complicated, right? Like you already thought this is complicated. It's even more complicated now. So it's like it becomes even worse. So let's go back to this here, to the image. And if I zoom in, I'm going to use another image here so we don't use always the same image. And just so that you can kind of like see the difference here. So if I'm going to use, let's say we use this one. I like this one. I want to show you this one because this is a cute image. All this footage, by the way, is from my Nuke course. So for example, this one here, which is a pretty crazy image, which required a lot of cleanup. This is a real dog. It's a real horse. It's one of the world's smallest horses, and then we have the puppet moving out. So in here, let me just, for example, scale, because the reason I want to do this is because I want to show you the fine detail of the actual puppet and the horse as well. So if I go closely to maybe the horse lines or even maybe these transparent lines, notice if I start reformatting or rescaling things. Originally the image originally this image is actually 2K. So it's like 2048 by 1152. That's the resolution of this image right now. I'm going to scale it to reformat. Let's say that we reformat it to 4K. So if I zoom in, again, notice how when you're there, notice how if I do impulse, it almost looks like pixelated, the horse, you know, like if you look at the front of the horse and the actual hair of the horse. But if I do actually in cubic, it blurs it a bit. And remember what we talked about, that Parson was the one that blurs the most. Look at how blurry it is with Parson. But then look at Lankus 6, how sharper it becomes. But in Sync 4 as well. But look at how it breaks the edges. So for example, if I'm scaling this, it starts to break edges. And this is really important, not just for scaling up, but also for scaling down. It has to do also when you scale up an image, not just like reformatting it, but also transforming that image as well. Now, to avoid these kind of artifacts that you get, like these black edges when you're starting to scale, one good thing to do is to do this methodology. So for example, one method could be this. You could have the image like this, and then to avoid having those nasty artifacts, we can use a node called the Log2Lin. The Log2Lin basically converts the image from linear, which is the standard color space of an image in Nuke. It converts it from linear into logarithmic. By doing that, it makes the image lifted. So all the blacks get lifted, all the brights go lower, and it basically looks much more washed out. And that's a good advantage. It's a good advantage because that allows you to then sharpen the image quite a lot, and then actually even sharpen even more if you want to. And then if you do the reverse, so if you put another Log2Lin, and this Log2Lin, instead of being linear to log, it's actually logged to lin, then that goes back and puts the image back to normal. So that means that if I disable these things here, I have the image, you know, let's look at the horse here. I have the image. I do Log2Lin to make the image much, much brighter and much, much washed out. This is very powerful for doing keying as well. And then basically I do Lin2Log and then I do Log2Lin, which is the invert. And so when I look at the original and I look at the result, it's the same because I'm just inverting. Now on the middle, I'm reformatting and scaling. So I'm reformatting, scaling, and then sharpening. So look at how different it looks. If I look at the buckle here, look at if I disable the reformat and the sharpen, if I disable the Log2Lin and the Lin2Log, notice how all those black edges were there and now they are gone because the Log2Lin is protecting those black edges. So in a way, when you're scaling something, this means if you're doing scaling in terms of transforming, using a transform node to scale something, or if you're reformatting to directly reformat an image, or even just moving in a layer from one place to the other, it's very important for you to always remember to do Log2Lin, Lin2Log to try to compensate that. The difference would be this. And if I put if you look at this one and you look at this one, which is the wrong one, this is the difference, you see? If I put a merge node with a difference mat, this is the actual, all the broken edges that get created by that bad scaling methodology, okay? So I hope that that's kind of understood. Now let's talk about this in context of actually talking about transformation instead. This matters. For example, let's say that we want to scale an image. So let's say that we have this woman again, like we said. Let's say that we transform, rotate, and then scale, and then crop, and then grade, for example. Let's say that we've scaled and zoomed in into her. So this, of course, would be, the problem with this would be that you are, obviously concatenation, which is something in Nuke that you need to be aware, and it has to do with these kind of nodes that have the same color. So when I look at this image here and I zoom in so much, you see, I don't believe I still have black pixels, but as a rule of thumb, whenever you're doing such an extreme scaling, I would advise you to do Log2Lin. In this case, I would do Lin2Log. I would then rotate, scale, crop, and then do the same, but the invert, which would be Lin2Log. So basically I do Lin2Log and then I do Log2Lin just to avoid any kind of sharpness, because remember, every single rotation, transform, and everything here has a filtering. See, I can have length 6 on all of them if I want to, for example, which is very sharp. Of course, it's not probably going to work, but you see, every single node in Nuke that has to do with transformations, with reformatting, with anything that is positioning the image, will have some kind of sharpening, filtering thing that has to do with what I was showing you on those graphs, okay? Now, I'm going to show you how bad this can go. So look at this image here, for example. If I rotate her and then transform and then crop, but imagine that I have the grade on the middle, what's going to happen is that what we called the concatenation, which is following the nodes all by themselves, because obviously I'm going to show you what concatenation means, which is in here. If I have 3 grade nodes following each other, for example, if I have this grade node here, like I have this image, and let's say that we overexpose this image, okay? So I'm going to do 20. So she's going to be completely overexposed, right? Now, so the first grade is doing 20. The second grade, let's say that we do, we lower that multiplication, and let's say that we go all the way to there. So notice how I was on 20, which was this overexposure. Then I am going to lower the overexposure by here. So I would do by 0.2, for example. So that means that I'm now overexposure. I'm reducing the overexposure by 0.1, for example. And then if I go to grade again, I can do even more exposure again. So these three nodes, because they are the same, category, they're both blue, which is the color correction category, they will be processed as one. So Nuke, when it's doing the CPU and GPU processing, it's going to concatenate them then as one. And Nuke, because it's float, it doesn't lose any detail. So although I overexposed and then downexposed and then overexposed again, all that information is still there. And not only that information is still there, but also these three nodes will be concatenated together as one process inside the processing of Nuke. This is true as well with transforming, scaling as well. But you need to be careful because sometimes you might be putting nodes in between. So notice how in here, for example, if I rotate, let's say I rotate in scale a bit. So let's say we do 1.5 of scale with a rotation of 20. And then I put a brightness on her. So let's say that we brighten her to, let's say, 3. And then I go in scale even more. And then I do a crop, So this looks fine, right? Well, I don't want to scale so much because if I scale so much, we won't see the nose. I want to see the nose so that I can show you this edge. Now, this looks fine in essence, doesn't it? So the thing that is going to happen here is if I now show you the same stuff happening here, but not have the layers like that. So let me show you real quick the same exact composite, and with the same crops as well. I'm just going to give the same crop, which would be here as well. So notice the difference. I'm going to show you the difference between 1 and 2. So this node here, this comp here, is breaking concatenation by having a different category of nodes in between the two nodes. So I'm going to show you the result of this one. And then this one, I have all the same nodes that are the same category, and then the grade is after. So I'm going to show you the difference between one and the other. Notice if I zoom in, one of them, which is the one that the grade node is in between the transformations, is more blurry than the one that the grade node is not in between. And if you look in the distance and you look at this one and that one, so I'm showing you these two, both nodes. So notice how in the distance, they look fine, right? If I go 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, they look fine, right? Like in the distance, they look like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's not a problem. I can put grade nodes and any other node in between. It's not a problem. But if you zoom in really closely into the detail, for example, of the metals here, for example, notice how one is more blurry than the other. The reason for this is because on this one, the transformation is happening as one go, is a concatenation. So one transformation and the other transformation, they're happening as one. So there's only one filter hit. That means that although we have a cubic filter on the first transform and a cubic filter on the second transform, because they're concatenated, both of them use the same filters. They only use one filter. That means the image is only filtered once, not twice, just once, because they're concatenated as one. As opposed to this one, where we filter cubically once, then we break concatenation by having a grade node, which is not the same category of processing. Remember, these are processes on the CPU, and these are processes on the GPU. And so that breaks, and then you have a second node that has another cubic filtering. So just by the sheer fact of having a grade node there, you're now filtering the image twice. And so not only you're filtering it once with the cubic, but you're filtering it twice with cubic. So now the image is twice more blurred than the original image. And that is why concatenation is so important, and also why it's so important for you to respect filtering, because this is the thing that you're going to have. If I look at the detail of her eye, for example, here, if you look at the detail of the eye, you see how much double filtering can really damage your image, because it basically blurs a lot more. I know it's really hard to see, but you see there? That's the difference between having two filters or one filter. So filtering is incredibly important. So remember to go to the help file and study the type of filtering. It's really important for you to understand why do we have so many types of filters and what do they do. And they have to do with everything in Nuke that filters. It has to do with the transformations. It has to do with the glows. It has to, sorry, the filter. Anything that is reformatting, transforming, even tracking, lens distortion, all the nodes. Like if I go back to this thing here, all these nodes, have filtering. So see, I'll give an example of some of them. Transform has a filter. Reformat has a filter. The card 3D has a filter. The position doesn't have a filter. Sorry, that's my mistake. So I'm just going to delete the ones that don't have a filter here, so that you can see at least these ones have a filter. And of course, sharpen has a filter, but it's a different type of filtering. It's a sharpening box, triangle, quadratic, or Gaussian filter, which we're not going to talk about that now. But it's really important for you to understand that all these nodes, including the lens distortion node, which is really important, and even the scanline render has a filtering as well. Notice how the reformat respects all those type of filterings. Lens distortion node respects all those type of filterings. The transform node respects all those type of filterings. And also even the scanline render respects all those type of filterings. That means that, for example, if you're doing a distortion of plates, removing the distortion of a lens, you need to be extra careful not to be doubling filtering an image. So filtering is incredibly important for you to maintain the sharpness of your image. This is also one of the reasons why we tend to film with more resolution than what we deliver. That is why if you're delivering 4K, you tend to film in 6K or 8K. If you're delivering in HD, you tend to film in 2K or 3K or 4K. You never really tend to film with the same resolution that you're going to deliver, because that is why, because we know we're going to filter the image. There is no way you're going to get away without. You're always going to filter something, either by doing a transform or reformat or doing a rescaling. You're always going to filter. But one of the things that you need to consider as a compositor is that you need to make sure you keep the image as unharmed as possible, as untouched as possible. And that is why this is so important. Okay, cool.